Alright guys, this is Camille. So today I'm going to talk about how to turn the grayscale environment into color one. And first, of course, you block in a huge chunk of shape. And for the composition, it's not gonna be straight up. It's gonna be slightly diagonal. And then I'm going to use the Photoshop default brush like this one, and then I'm going to adjust this shape so it's not fully rounded. Of course, and adjust the opacity to probably 50% or 40%, and choose the solid black color. And then I can fully block in the shape. What I want to do is sci-fi scenes with spaceship, flying through. So I lay down my perspective ahead. I try to draw along the perspective line, so it would give me a dramatic feel of depth through the perspective. And I choose the smaller size of brush, just adding the detail of the far away shape. Well, I forgot to talk about beforehand. Of course, I set this layer into its own, and I have my it's separate from the background layer. And it's all gonna follow this perspective line. And since I have the brush opacity set kind of transparent, so you can see how brush stroke that overlaps, and it gives it more information and details. And remember that the technique I use here is for the object that's closer to us will be more gloomy, and for the object that's further away from us will be fainted away. And you can also adjust the hardness of the brush edge. If I want, I can always select brighter color, brighter gray. For the upper left spot, I want a light source coming from there. So I'm going to try to lock my layer and just do white. You want to add more detail to the spot that's light up by the light, and try to keep it less detail in the shadow area. Well, since detail in the darker tone value of light will not be that obvious, so you want to push up the detail level at the spot that's where the light is. I mean, not overexpose the light, except that. So the definition of the lighting area is gonna be readable. So anyway, I hope that gives you an idea of how to start, lay down the basic silhouette first. So now I want to give it some huge horizontal columns. Go back to the same brush. I'm just laying down, very basic silhouette shape. I can tilt the brush in any way. And for now, I'm just gonna keep using color black. And the cool thing, I can lock the layer. I'm gonna give you some shade. Just use airbrush. So the further away from us, it's gonna be a bit lighter. Gonna choose white paint, or maybe white is too white. So and remember, I have my layer block, so I can fully just do paintings on the area that I feel it's the right light reflection it's gonna hit. For the further away objects, gonna use smaller size brush, and I'm just gonna add in some lines or details. And I can always go back very black color, give it even more detail. I mean, adding more, smaller stuffs. So I just create a new layer. Gonna add a further column. I don't like the transfer, so I'm gonna turn it off because it makes my I don't want the pen pressure effect. So I'm just doodling here and can block my layer, adding some lights while keep your brush stroke simple. So I can always adjust the shape of and the size of the column if I don't like it. I would just select it, enlarge. So here's the polished final. And yeah, by the way, I add some line straw in the background. In this step, I'm going to add texture. And the texture, I just grab it from cgtexture.com. it's royalty free, or you can do it from any website that offers royalty free photos. I would just unsaturate all the texture photos I have and adjust the opacity. This photo actually looks just like some pipes or some machine. So I just roughly, erase some part of it and lower the opacity, like probably like 18. You can hardly read, but I fill in some of the details. And for this one, I set an overlay. A normal mold, it actually looks like this, like very slightly erased. And it's just a texture that's being reused and reused. And this one's soft light. And the normal mode, it just looks like this. It's like a concrete wall or something with multiple straight lines. So I would set in an overlay. You can do it in soft light or overlay. It depends on which you find it better. By the way, I want to add something when you're doing texture or when you're applying photo texture. Try to just apply the photo texture into the mid-tone value, not the darkest tone and not the lightest tone, because the texture and the darkest tone tend to fade away, and that's the same thing in the lightest tone. So when you apply photo texture, you want to just apply in the mid-tone value of range. And so here I'm going to demonstrate how to quickly do a spaceship. So I just block out a silhouette. I would apply the pen 100% because then I can block the layer and pen in any value. I will erase, just make the shape of this big chunk of black. So after you have the silhouette laid down, I can just go to airbrush, just lighter tone. I'm just doing some highlight from the top. And I'm going to add in lines of detail just using just a black color. And of course, you can always freely zoom in to add in more details. If you feel it's too light on the bottom, just add in more black then. Honestly, since the spaceship is a little bit far away from us, it's gonna be further away from this huge column on the top. The darkest tone of its darker shade is gonna be lighter. I'm gonna use opacity and just brush in really light tone here. And you can always use your smudge tool. And now I'm gonna apply some bus light from the spaceships. I'm gonna give a shape dynamic base paint pressure. Well, I'm just going to erase it then with airbrush. So give it an effect that the bus light is getting thinner and thinner at the end. And the bus light is going to be, kind of faded away at the end, but having this sharp, a little bit sharp, hard edge at the beginning, where it's going to boost out. And by the way, I also kind of light up the area on the spaceship will be affected by the bust light, so it will not be that dark. And now I'm going to add some filter effect like sharpen and blur. So with one layer visible, I'm going to click Ctrl Shift Alt E, flatten everything to one new layer. So just go to filter and then sharpen more. And it doesn't seem that it does that much, so you gotta zoom in and see. So that's before and after, and you can add more until you feel it's up enough, but do not overuse it. I'm just going to duplicate this layer because I'm gonna add a blur effect. Go to filter, blur, Gaussian. Probably add one like this. Just the opacity to probably 40 or 30 to 50% is enough, and overlay. And that's before, that's after. What this does is just it will enhance the contrast of your lighting value and balance the lighting contrast also. However, this overlay blur effect would definitely makes your image darker. So what I do is just I will light up the midtone and the blur layer. So I just create a new layer with everything flattened to one because I'm going to paint on this grayscale image. I have my brush mode set in overlay and choose the orange color since I want the lighting source to be orange and the background it's in kind of blue cyan blue. I want to make sure the panel that's closer to us is gonna be having more orange. I'm gonna choose a blue cyan, or kind of blue. A blue color, because the complementary color of orange is blue. And we're gonna choose a bit darker tone of blue to darken the bottom of the panel, or the panel that's further away. I'm gonna adjust the brush mode to highlight, back to kind of a bit cyan blue. Since overlay, it hardly take any effect into wider area, so that's why I use highlight. Don't need to adding too much color because you can always adjust it later. If you added too much color, well, I mean you can adjust it later, but it's gonna be a little bit hard. Of course, it's here's gonna be like golden and yellow, and the same thing I set in highlight. And remember, we still have the silhouette layer and grayscale separated, so I'm going to go back to the grayscale layer and click automatically select the layer, this column layer for me. I'm going to have my brush mode set in color dodge, because the highlight on those metal is gonna be the reflection light is gonna be very strong, so I used color dodge. And if you don't want to see the selection line, you want to hide them, you can Control H to hide them. See, that's a really fast way to just light up. And I can just deselect, squeeze, flatten the brush stroke, paint some effect here. Paint some highlights. If you don't want the color, the color don't need to be too saturated, just a little bit grayish yellow, or more grayish yellow. Still don't find the bottom is dark enough, so go do overlay, just choose very, just whatever dark color. And I can just Control B, bring down the color balance, add some cyan to my midtone. The highlight, probably not too much blue. Just to fill in some highlights here. Oh, it's my spaceship. So now I want to add some red to the place that's closer to us. Probably not too saturated red. Adjust the brush mode to highlight and choose the cyan. I'm going to paint the buzz light of the spaceship. Remember, I choose the highlights because overlay doesn't do much effect on the wider tone volume. If you do a linear dodge, buzz light is gonna be very bright. Select spaceship and then paint. Just do a highlight as well. And I want to make the wing of the spaceship that's really obvious. So I'm just going to deselect the part that I want. And back to the squeezing tilted brush. 100%. And I can always use overlay to enhance the contrast. I'm gonna hide the selection and just use overlay to select a darker tone color and enhance the contrast. The spaceship is closer to us, so it will have stronger contrast. I'm gonna select inverse, and I'm gonna add probably a lighter tone behind the spaceship. I'm going to just Control H to hide the selection. It doesn't do much effect, so I'm going to do a highlight. Factor it's orange. So purple blue, the yellow doesn't do much good here, so I'm going to make it purple. So I'm going to add a little bit purple blue here. Just slightly brush off to see the effect. And so here I'm just going to add some lighting texture to just to test and see how it's gonna be like. This texture is gonna be a city light, 100% opacity. The opacity drip like this, and I have a soft light. It will add some more information to it. And here's the same thing. I just have it at the highlight and erase a lot of part, and that's actually the city lights. Because since the thing is sci-fi, so you'll be able to have some lights here and there on the panel. So I want to flatten everything to one layer to work on it more. I brush mode overlay. Let's try highlight. And the color is too saturated, so I want to desaturate the color. But I want more colors here, so yeah, I forgot to deselect the layer of the spaceship. Also want to kind of light up the panel right here. Use overlay because it will preserve any information underneath. I'm just adding some highlight. I'm just using overlay to adding highlights here. So probably more saturated right here. While to enrich the image more further, you can clean up those details. Like the shape right here, it's off from the perspective, so I just turn back onto my perspective. I can redo the shape on a new layer. Well, my brush mode is gonna be set into normal. And you can really clean up the shape. If you want eyes to read, the edge of the shape is super important to be clean. Gonna add some highlights. And I can really squeeze it. And for the contrast right here in the lightest area, remember I say if you want the contrast to be straightened more, you can use overlight and choose a dark tone. And it instantly will just darken your darkest tone. Don't need to worry about it. I have to go in stroke by stroke, line by line. I'm gonna just adjust the color. I want this huge color and having the color in more purple. Gonna give it light here. I can go back to normal brush mode. Just kind of do to brush in. Give it the roughness. I want to add some color in the darker stone, so I'm going to lighten. Choose lighten mode. So you only paint the darker stone. Go back to the normal layer, normal brush mode. Just gonna add in some lines here. Go back to the flattened all every layer. I'll brush in some that's too saturated. So boost up the lights more. Remember, I'm going to use highlight. Give it a dynamic shape. Well, I can do it on other layers to ensure, because then I can erase it whatever I want. Go back to the highlight mode layer, a highlight brush mode. And I can also go color mode to adjust color if I want. So here's the slightly more detailed version. In the next step, I just grab an image of rusty metal, set it on soft light. In the normal mode, it looks like this. And the opacity is, I put in 56. Just give it some texture. And this layer, just a minor adjustment. For example, I filled the original image, the column further away right here, it's not obvious. The most important thing when you do environment art is you want to make sure that you separate object obviously, layer by layer, visually clear that you can tell the object is closer or further. So I just use the lasso tool, just to select out the shape, add in the color, a darker tone color, and it will instantly, separate this object from the further background. And I also fixed the information or the detail right here, the line, to make it more readable, and also darken the area here and here. Just make sure the column is more readable. And the last, if you want, you can also add the two tips I always use, which is filter others and high pass, and also the blur, Gaussian blur, and then set the Gaussian blur layer in overlay, which I already covered those in my previous tutorial. You can find them there. So I guess that's pretty much it.